I thought I was about to become a father, but the truth shattered everything. The woman I loved, the life we built, it was all a lie. And when I found out who the real father was, that's when I decided they would both pay. You won't believe how it all ended. Ethan sat at his desk, drowning in a sea of ungraded essays. The soft hum of the school's ventilation system was the only sound accompanying the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, now creeping past midnight. He stretched his aching back, rolling his shoulders before reaching for his coffee mug, only to grimace at the cold remnants. As he reached for a red pen, his elbow accidentally knocked over a handbag resting on the desk's edge, spilling its contents onto the papers before him. Sighing, he began picking up scattered items: lipstick, a hairbrush, a pack of gum, until his fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. A thin plastic stick. His heart skipped a beat as he brought it closer. 2 pink lines stood out vividly in the tiny window. Pregnancy test. Ethan's mind momentarily shut down. His eyes darted to the handbag, Samantha's. His wife must have left it there when she stopped by earlier. He swallowed hard, his hands suddenly unsteady. Their struggles with infertility had stretched over the past 5 years, their dreams repeatedly crushed by failed attempts. They had spent their savings on specialists, endured sleepless nights filled with whispered reassurances, and weathered the quiet heartbreak of each negative result. And now, against all odds, she was pregnant. His breathing came in shallow gasps as he fumbled through her bag, fingers trembling as they pulled out a folded piece of paper. An ultrasound scan. The date in the corner read just 2 days ago. A lump formed in his throat as he traced the grainy image of what could only be their long-awaited miracle. A surge of emotions, relief, euphoria, disbelief, flooded his chest. He blinked back tears, already forming a plan. Tomorrow morning he would surprise Samantha. Breakfast in bed. Blueberry pancakes, her favorite. Maybe even flowers. They had lost so much time drowning in sorrow, but now they could finally look ahead. That night, as he slid under the covers beside his sleeping wife, a smile played at his lips. For the first time in years, hope had returned to his life. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains as Ethan woke early. He slipped out of bed, eager to begin his surprise. As he passed by his home office, a muffled voice caught his attention. Samantha's. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her tone frantic. He froze just outside the door, his breath hitching. "No, I haven't told Ethan yet," she continued, voice hushed but urgent. "He's been waiting for this for so long. How can I tell him it's Lucas's?" The world tilted. His stomach churned violently, a cold sweat breaking out across his skin. Lucas. The name burned in his mind. Samantha's coworker, a man with an easygoing charm, someone Ethan had never considered a threat. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Ethan stumbled back, retreating into the kitchen. His hands shook as he gripped the counter, his mind spiraling into a dark abyss. The flour and eggs he had set out for pancakes blurred in his vision, now mocking symbols of a celebration that would never happen. The happiness of mere hours ago now felt like a cruel joke. Minutes passed in agonizing silence. Eventually, he forced himself to move, mechanically putting away the ingredients. He couldn't break now. Not yet. Monday morning arrived with a cruel sense of normalcy. Ethan went through the motions, dressing for work, drinking coffee he could barely taste, and listening to Samantha's cheerful chatter as if nothing had changed. Every word she spoke felt like a dagger twisting deeper into his chest. The hallways of Belridge High buzzed with the usual morning energy. Students shuffled between lockers, teachers exchanged greetings, and somewhere down the corridor, a familiar voice rang out in animated conversation. "Lucas." Ethan turned his head sharply, spotting the man laughing among a group of students, effortlessly commanding their attention. The sight ignited a primal rage deep in Ethan's gut. His fingers curled into fists, his pulse pounding against his temples. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to march down the hallway and wipe that smug smile off Lucas's face. But no, that would be reckless, impulsive. He needed control. He needed a plan. Taking a deep breath, Ethan forced himself to turn away, stepping into the safe confines of his classroom. His free period gave him a chance to think. He sank into his chair, booting up his computer, his mind already racing ahead. His fingers moved with precision, pulling up search results on paternity laws, father's rights, and legal loopholes. The information was grim. Without concrete proof, Samantha could simply put his name on the birth certificate, making him legally responsible for a child that wasn't his. Even with evidence, the courts were rarely in favor of men in such disputes. His jaw tightened as he clicked through their joint bank account. A string of withdrawals caught his eye, large sums siphoned off over the past 3 months. The exact time frame in which she must have conceived. His blood ran cold. Money. But for what? His fingers drummed against the desk as he stared at the figures. If he had to guess, it was either for a potential abortion in case she had changed her mind, or an escape plan. A way out for her and Lucas. Ethan inhaled sharply through his nose, forcing himself to remain still. His mind was already building the framework of something bigger. If Samantha and Lucas had played him for a fool, then it was time to turn the tables. As the first bell rang, students began filing in, their conversations a distant hum against the roaring storm inside Ethan's head. He adjusted his tie, exhaled slowly, and faced his class. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice calm, steady, almost indifferent. "Let's talk about historical deception. Who can tell me about the greatest betrayals in history?" The words tasted bitter, but he smiled anyway. After all, he was about to orchestrate one of his own. Ethan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The school parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few stragglers heading home after extracurricular activities. He exhaled slowly, his mind replaying every detail of the past few days. The damning phone call, the hidden financial transactions, and the bitter truth that had shattered his world. His wife carried another man's child. For 5 years, he had stood by Samantha through every devastating failure, every sleepless night filled with whispered promises that one day they would have their family. Now, when he finally believed their miracle had arrived, it turned out to be the ultimate betrayal. The rage simmered beneath his skin, but Ethan had spent his life learning how to control his emotions. This wouldn't be solved with blind anger. He needed precision, strategy. He wasn't going to be another broken man left picking up the pieces of his wife's infidelity. He would be the one writing the ending to this story, and it wouldn't be one she expected. That night, Ethan arrived home to find Samantha in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air, wrapping the moment in a cruel mockery of domestic bliss. "Hey, you're home late," she said, glancing up from the stove. "Staff meeting ran long," Ethan replied smoothly, setting his bag down. "How was your day?" She smiled, oblivious. "Good. Just exhausted." Ethan watched her carefully, studying every movement, every flicker of emotion across her face. How easily she lied. How effortlessly she pretended. "You should rest more," he said, stepping closer. "For the baby." Her hand froze for a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered, nodding. "Yeah, you're right." The act was impressive, he had to admit. She played the role of the loving wife perfectly, not a single crack in her facade. But Ethan saw it now. The way she avoided his gaze just a little too often. The way she shifted uncomfortably when he brought up the pregnancy. She thought she was fooling him. That worked in his favor. Ethan moved through the house that evening with a purpose, carefully setting the stage for what was to come. While Samantha showered, he retrieved the small package from his work bag, a set of hidden cameras, purchased in cash from a tech store across town. She had underestimated him. By the time she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a robe, Ethan was already in bed, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had changed. "Long day?" she asked. He forced a tired smile. "Yeah. You?" She hesitated for a split second. "The same. Liar." Ethan turned off the bedside lamp and pulled the covers up, closing his eyes. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe evenly. This was just the beginning. The cameras were discreet, tucked into bookshelves, mounted inside decorative plants, even hidden within the corner of the living room lamp. Ethan had been meticulous, ensuring they would capture every movement, every whisper, every stolen glance she thought no one would see. And the waiting began. The first night, nothing. The second, silence. By the third, Ethan started to wonder if Samantha had grown cautious. Had she sensed something? Then, on the fourth night, the screen of his laptop flickered to life, and his patience was rewarded. Samantha sat curled up on the couch, her phone pressed to her ear. Ethan turned up the volume on the live feed, heart hammering in his chest as a familiar voice crackled through the speakers. "Lucas, I miss you," he murmured. Samantha exhaled, a soft, wistful sigh. "I miss you too." It's hard pretending. Ethan keeps looking at me like I've given him everything he's ever wanted. I feel like the worst person in the world. "You could just tell him," Lucas suggested. Silence. Then, her voice, small, hesitant. "I can't. Not yet. He'd never forgive me." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the words slicing through him like glass. Not yet. She didn't say never. She wasn't staying out of love. She was staying out of necessity, biding her time until she figured out how to leave without shattering her perfect illusion. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing the anger down. She wanted to play pretend? Fine. But soon, she'd realize that she was playing the wrong game. The next morning, Ethan moved with quiet efficiency. He transferred funds into a separate account, ensuring Samantha couldn't access his savings. He backed up the security footage, encrypting the files so they couldn't be erased. And then he went further. Using an old backup drive, he accessed Samantha's email. The password, still their anniversary date, was a bitter reminder of the life he thought they shared. Her inbox was filled with mundane exchanges, work schedules, appointment reminders, until he scrolled further down. There, buried beneath months of emails, was a string of messages from Lucas. Plans, conversations, discussions about what comes next. Ethan's stomach twisted. She had been planning this for longer than he thought. Further down, a separate thread caught his attention. A bank confirmation, a loan application. His pulse quickened as he opened the documents, his eyes scanning the details. Samantha had taken out a private loan, a large one. He clicked through rapidly, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The timing matched the withdrawals he had noticed earlier. She wasn't just keeping secrets. She was preparing to disappear. His grip on the mouse tightened. No, she didn't get to leave on her terms. She didn't get to control how this ended. Ethan inhaled deeply, his mind whirring with possibilities. He could confront her, expose her, tear down her carefully constructed world in an instant. But that would be too easy. No, Samantha needed to feel it. The slow, creeping dread. The realization that her lies were unraveling. The weight of everything she had done crashing down on her. And Ethan was going to make sure that when the fall came, she had nowhere left to run. Ethan moved through the day with practiced ease, his every action deliberate, his expression calm. No one would suspect the war raging inside him. No one would see the carefully controlled rage that simmered beneath his skin. He had uncovered more than enough evidence. Samantha's infidelity, her financial deception, the life she had been planning with Lucas. But evidence wasn't enough. He needed her to suffer, and he needed to ensure that when she fell, there was no way back. That afternoon, Ethan met with a lawyer, a sharp, ruthless professional recommended by a former colleague. He laid out everything. The affair, the secret loan, the falsified financial documents. The lawyer listened intently, occasionally making notes. When Ethan finished, the man leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. "You have an airtight case," he said simply. "If you want to pursue divorce, you could walk away with everything, house, assets, even spousal support, given the financial misconduct. With the right strategy, she wouldn't just lose you. She'd lose her future." Ethan nodded, satisfaction blooming in his chest. But this wasn't just about leaving Samantha. It was about making sure she had nothing left to hold on to. That night, he set the next phase into motion. He crafted an anonymous tip to the bank, flagging the suspicious activity on their joint account. He provided documentation of the falsified loan applications, making sure it would trigger an internal investigation. Then, he scheduled a meeting with their financial advisor under the pretense of discussing investment options. When the conversation shifted, he casually mentioned concerns about their credit status, dropping just enough details to plant the seed of doubt. By the time Samantha realized what was happening, the damage would already be done. A few days later, he watched her from the kitchen doorway as she stared at her phone, her brows furrowed. "Something wrong?" he asked, feigning concern. She forced a smile. "Just a weird bank notification. Probably nothing." She had no idea. Later that night, when she stepped out to run errands, Ethan checked her laptop. As expected, she had frantically searched for information about account freezes and fraud investigations. Panic was setting in. Good. But he wasn't done yet. Ethan had spent the past week collecting more leverage. He had installed tracking software on Samantha's phone, mirroring her text messages and location. Every conversation with Lucas was now at his fingertips. And then, there was the matter of Lucas himself. Ethan needed him to suffer just as much. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That Friday, the school administration announced that faculty contracts were under review due to budget constraints. It was the perfect moment to act. Ethan sent an anonymous email to the school board, attaching carefully compiled documentation of Lucas's relationship with Samantha. He framed it not as a personal grievance but as a professional concern, implying a pattern of inappropriate behavior, with Samantha as just one example. He made sure the email came from a newly created account, leaving no trail back to him. Then he waited. The fallout came swiftly. By Monday, murmurs spread through the faculty lounge. Lucas was under internal review. His face was drawn, his usual arrogance replaced with thinly veiled anxiety. Samantha, meanwhile, had grown more distant. She was withdrawing money in small increments, likely preparing to run. But she wouldn't get the chance. That night, as she sat in their living room, Ethan set down his drink and watched her closely. "We should talk," he said casually. Samantha looked up, startled. "About what?" "About our future." She hesitated. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I was thinking, maybe we should move, get a fresh start somewhere new." Her eyes widened slightly. "Move?" "Yeah, somewhere quiet, where we can raise a family." He let the words linger, watching the conflict in her expression. He knew she had been planning to leave, but if she thought he was making the first move, it would throw her off balance. "Ethan, she started, but he cut her off. "I know things have been hard," he continued smoothly, "but we can fix it. You, me, the baby. We can leave all this behind." Her fingers curled slightly against the couch. She was trapped, unable to reject the offer outright without revealing her intentions. Finally, she swallowed and nodded. That sounds nice." Ethan smiled. She had no idea that by the time she realized what was happening, it would be far too late. Ethan had spent weeks orchestrating his revenge, carefully setting every piece in place. Samantha still believed they were leaving together, convinced that their future lay elsewhere. She had no idea that the house sale had been finalized solely in Ethan's name, nor that Lucas was already under scrutiny at work, his reputation deteriorating by the day. Every evening, Ethan observed her, noting the moments when she checked her phone too often, when her expression flickered with hesitation before speaking. She was still playing the role of the devoted wife, but the mask was slipping. He had gathered enough evidence now, more than enough. The bank accounts had been locked, the lawyer had finalized the divorce filings, and the sale of the house was complete. Samantha's future was no longer in her hands. Still, Ethan wanted one final confirmation. Late at night, when she had gone to bed, he reviewed the surveillance footage once more. There was no hesitation in the recordings. Samantha had been planning to take everything from him. The conversations were clear. She had spoken of a fresh start, of money hidden away, of a life with Lucas that Ethan was never meant to discover. She had spoken about how easy it would be to manipulate him, how blind he had always been to her real intentions. The next morning, he set his final plan in motion. He sent a message to Lucas's wife, Faith, arranging a meeting. She had already received his anonymous package weeks earlier, filled with proof of her husband's betrayal. Now, she sat across from him, eyes hollow, her hands clutching a coffee cup she had long since forgotten to drink from. She had believed in her marriage, just as Ethan had believed in his. The realization of betrayal had shattered something fundamental in both of them. But Faith was no longer in denial. She was ready to act. They agreed on their course of action. Ethan ensured she had the last pieces of information she needed, and then he left, knowing the inevitable fallout would follow. That evening, Samantha returned home, unsuspecting. The house was eerily quiet, the dining table set with a single glass of wine. Ethan sat waiting, his expression unreadable. She hesitated at the doorway, sensing the shift in the air, but forced herself to move forward. He slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside were printed messages, financial records, and legal papers. As she flipped through them, her breathing grew unsteady. The realization dawned slowly, the weight of her own deception crashing down upon her. Then her phone buzzed. Lucas. The message was brief and damning. He had lost his job. Faith had filed for divorce. His accounts were under investigation. Their plans had crumbled before they had even begun. Samantha's hand trembled as she stared at the screen, her mind struggling to grasp how everything had unraveled so quickly. Ethan observed her reaction in silence. There was no need for words. She finally turned toward him, but the distance between them was already insurmountable. He had made his decision long before this moment, and she had made hers the day she chose deception over truth. Without a word, he stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her own making. The aftermath unfolded with ruthless efficiency. Ethan had spent months planning every detail, and now the final pieces were falling into place. The house had been sold, the funds transferred into accounts Samantha could never access. Her credit was ruined, her debts mounting with no lifeline in sight. The comfortable life she had envisioned with Lucas was nothing more than a delusion. Lucas himself had been exposed, his career in shambles, his reputation beyond repair. Faith had ensured his name was blacklisted in their industry, his personal and professional lives left in ruin. Ethan observed it all from a distance. He no longer needed to intervene. The weight of their own choices was dragging them under. Samantha attempted to reach him at first. The calls started as frantic pleas, evolved into desperate apologies, and eventually settled into silence. She had lost everything, her financial security, her social standing, and the illusion of control she had once wielded so confidently. Meanwhile, Ethan thrived. The fresh start he had built for himself was more than an escape. It was a reinvention. He relocated, taking a position at a prestigious institution far from the wreckage of his old life. His name was no longer tied to Samantha's, his finances were protected, and for the first time in years, he felt truly free. Occasionally, he allowed himself a glance at the past, a brief moment of curiosity about where she had ended up. Through whispers from mutual acquaintances, he learned the details. Samantha had been forced to move into a cramped apartment, a far cry from the home she once shared with him. Lucas had abandoned her, unwilling to bear the consequences of their downfall. Alone, she struggled, clinging to what little she had left. But Ethan didn't reach out. He owed her nothing. One evening, as he sat in his new home, a glass of whiskey in hand, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The betrayal, the pain, the meticulous execution of his revenge. It had all led to this moment. The past no longer held power over him. With a quiet sense of closure, he picked up his phone and deleted the last remaining messages from Samantha. There was nothing left to say. This chapter of his life was over. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt entirely his own.